Amen. We just want to say hi to everyone. Today is Tuesday, and it's a privilege to introduce tonight a guest for Testimony Tuesday. I'm Pastor Jesse Jimenez, and I have a special guest here this evening to share their testimony on Testimony Tuesday. It's a great privilege to introduce this sister of ours. She has a fantastic story, and God has done a tremendous work in her life. So we apologize we're a little late today, but I'm confident that you're going to be blessed with today's Testimony Tuesday. So we hope you enjoy it. We pray that your heart will be open, and give some time to hear this story. So without any further notice, I'm going to introduce our guest this evening. She comes a long way. She was born in Seaside. She grew up most of her life here in Gilroy. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our testimony for Testimony Tuesday this evening, Shatoya Johnson. God bless. And here's Shatoya.
Amen. Hi everybody out there on Facebook Live. Like he said, I'm Shatoya, and I was born and raised in Fort Ord and raised here in Gilroy, and I have been in Gilroy since I was about 16, and I just want to take some time to thank God for my salvation. I want to thank Him for saving me and setting me free, for His grace and His mercy, and I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. There's a lot of people who know bits and pieces of things that have happened in my life, but they don't really know the story. So I'm going to share my story with you today, and I just pray that you are blessed, that it impacts your life, that you are encouraged by the life that I have lived, and that God would speak through me and just allow me to have the transparency. So I was born in Fort Ord, California, which is now called split between Marina and Seaside. I was a baby of an Army brat. My mom had me when she was 16, and my mom was a drug addict. So I was raised by my grandparents, who were God-fearing people. They took us to Baptist church. I grew up in Baptist church. I sang in the choir. I was very involved in church all the time. If you know a Baptist church, they don't mess around. They take church seriously. You're there all the time. My grandpa was a deacon. The sisters in the church would always watch over me. And during that time of my mom's drug use, my grandma tried to show her love and kindness, and, we would be home with her, and she'd come high or drunk, and we'd have to take care of her, mostly me. I would have to take care of her, and I have two younger brothers that, I would take care of while my grandma was working. Trying to be the older sister to them and raising them, and trying to raise myself. So my mom was in and out of programs, and through that time we were in and out of counseling. My brother struggled with depression and anger, and I kind of dove into school. I did really well in school, and my grandma made me do classical music, so I played the violin, the cello, the viola, the piano. I sang. I just kind of used that as my outlet for a long time, until I started getting into middle school. Middle school, I was caught at school. I took some of my grandma's E&J to school with some orange juice, and I was selling it to my friends. So then I got suspended, and that's kind of where it started, because I got a taste. It didn't even taste good. I just thought it was cool, and I just started sipping after that. I would sneak all of her drinks. We would get high at school, but I would still try to maintain my school grades. And in middle school, I was also raped, and I had to walk home from school, and I just remember feeling so broken and so lost, and that was the point when I just was done being that happy person, trying to be what everybody expected of me. I was just done and broken inside, and I walked home like there was nothing to say. And I remember walking home alone, I remember walking home up the hill in Seaside, up Hilby Street, and feeling like I had nothing to live for, but I didn't know how to get rid of my life. And after that, I just became empty. I just became broken. And, not too much longer, my mom decided to go to the Victory Outreach Women's Home. And, throughout that time, I would pray, because that's what I was told in church, is to pray and that God would heal her. But I never really knew God personally, and I never really knew how he could change a life. And then my mom went to the women's home and Victory Outreach, and she began to show that she was changing. She began to show that there was a God. So when I was 16, my mom got out of the women's home. She got her own place, and I came to live with her. And by this time, I was already, living that life of a teenager, smoking and drinking and, being promiscuous. And she made me go to the gang, which had newly been started, and trying to find my identity here in Gilroy with all of these people who look different than me, who talk different than me, trying to find out who I was and who I was to my mom. We had a broken relationship, so I was trying to be what she asked of me, because she made me go to church, and now she was this saved mother, but we're learning together. And it was difficult. I can't lie that I didn't want to rebel, and I didn't want to be a teenager, and I wanted to go back with my grandmas at times, but I kind of stuck it out. And I had my first child at 16, and I thought my life was over. Even though I loved her so much, I thought my life was over at that point, and yet it wasn't. I didn't realize at that time that God had another plan for me. My daughter's dad and I, we worked really hard to get our own place, and I moved out at 17, and we had another child in 2001. And even throughout that time, that's all I wanted, was my own family, and I wasn't satisfied with that. I was still trying to live the partying lifestyle. I was introduced to crank at that time. I was going out every weekend. He was home with the kids, and I was unfaithful to him, and just living a lawless life, trying to fill a void that only God could fill. And I was searching for love that he wasn't giving me, because he didn't know how to give me that love. But I couldn't communicate that to him, because we were 16, 17 young adults. Young teenagers, trying to have our own apartment and live our lives, and and it just didn't work out. We had 3 kids together, and then we split up. And when we split up, it was like my life was over. I dove really deep into drugs and alcohol. At that time, it was like meth, and I had my own apartment at that time. So I was trying to live the life of a functioning addict, keeping a job, paying bills, taking care of kids, but at the same time, I was getting high all day, every day. I had people coming over at nighttime. When we would share custody of our kids, when the kids were gone, it was even worse. I did days, weeks at times. I was trying to hold up the facade that I had everything under control, and that as long as I had my place, I wasn't like those other addicts that would lose everything and lose their kids. As long as I had my kids, I thought that I was better than other people who did drugs, and just the lies that I allowed myself to believe, that this is the life that I could live, that it's fine because I still have. I thought that since I had my kids that it was fine, but at the same time, I was a very ugly person. I was vindictive, I was mean, I wasn't that great of a mother. I was tired and irritable, and my kids were taken care of, and I thank God for that. But just very ugly inside, so I was ugly to those around me. I didn't appreciate the things that, the little victories that I had in my life. I didn't appreciate the grace that God had shown me in my life. But I had a praying mother, and I know she was praying for me because there was instances in my life where things could have gone a lot worse for me. During that time, I was seeing somebody, and they were also an addict. I let them move in my home, and we were having a party one night, and my kids were asleep. My kids were asleep in the room, and the situation escalated. One of the people that were there, he started fighting with another person that was there, and things got crazy and heated, and I ended up stabbing him 3 times. And then the guy that I was seeing at the time, he finally came back, and he came in on the situation, and he pushed the guy out. At that time is when the guy realized that I had stabbed him, and so he called the cops. The cops they took me down for questioning. They were like, "Why didn't you call if you knew you stabbed him?" And it just happened so fast. It was so instinctively that I didn't even realize. As we were driving to the police station, the cops were telling me that he was being flown to Stanford, that he was on life support, that he was on the verge of dying. If he were to die, I would go to prison. I wouldn't see my kids again. And he just kept reminding me, "Well, you're not under arrest. We just want to take you for questioning, but if he dies, it's a different situation." And I just remember praying to God that, "Oh, I'm not jail material. Please don't let me go to jail." And so after the questioning, they held me in the cell overnight. They told me that if the DA picks up charges, then I will go to jail the next day. And I just remember calling my mom, and not calling my mom, calling my kid's dad, and telling him that I was arrested. And I didn't want to call my mom because I know my mom, being somebody who goes to church, was not going to understand the situation. And I was just embarrassed because I knew better, and yet here I was getting high and having people in my house and partying and situations like this. And thank God he didn't, but by God's grace, they dropped the charges. He actually had a pretty extensive drug and abuse history, and me, on the other hand, I have not. So they said that I was protecting my children, which I was, but I just knew that it was God. But even with that, it wasn't enough to get me to stop. So later on, we moved out of those apartments. I started school. I was working a job, still taking care of kids, and taking care of my kids, and still doing drugs, trying to go to church, trying to be a better person, but still having those bouts and those struggles where I gave in to drinking, or just giving into the lifestyle of still searching for something. Even though I was going to church, it wasn't a complete lifestyle change, and I didn't know him personally. I didn't know God personally, and I was still searching for that fulfillment, for that peace that only God could give you. I was still very broken, and just ugly, and I wasn't allowing God to deal with me. Even though I was going to church, even though I was part of different ministries, I was still holding part of myself hostage from God. And I had gotten blessed with this amazing opportunity to move to Morgan Hill. I was in a beautiful home. We moved there in March. We were there for the year. I had a great party, had a few great parties for my kids. And there was just one point where I could not pay rent anymore. I was having a lot of other strangers come into my house. I was doing coke. I was trying other things, trying other drugs, and I remember my kids waking up and wondering who these people were in my home, and just I was very, very just on the verge of losing everything, and I was tired. I was tired of living that life, of searching for the next high, of trying to find some kind of satisfaction in drugs or alcohol, because you can never get high enough, you can never drink enough. You just wake up feeling worse than you did and feeling like you have to find more, and you can't, because there's never enough money, there's never enough people who answer the phone. The dope dealers don't answer the phone, or there's always some excuse of why you can't get what you need. You're always searching and searching, and you can't get that fulfillment. And my mom kept pushing the issue. I wasn't going to church anymore, and she kept pushing the issue, and a few of my other friends had gotten saved and started going back to church, and I was just done. And my mom's like, you need to go to the women's home, you need to change your life, and you need to do what's best for your kids. And I couldn't pay rent, and at that time rent was so cheap. I think it was maybe $900,000 for a 3-bedroom in Morgan Hill, and I couldn't afford to take care of that. And it was on November 2nd, or it was October 30th, that I decided to go to the women's home. But I didn't want to go to the women's home in Gilroy, because I didn't want to be seen by people who knew me here. I didn't want to be seen as my parents' kid. I didn't want to be treated differently, because I practically grew up in Gilroy Victory Outreach. I wanted a fresh start, and so I chose to go to Salinas. November 2nd, 2010. I went into the women's home in Salinas. It was the worst and best day of my life. I was only planning to go for 3 months. And it was really hard to explain to my kids that I was leaving them to go take care of me, because in their eyes, I wasn't doing right, but they didn't know what was wrong. And in their eyes, it was like I was leaving them. I remember just dropping off Alicia at daycare. Alicia was my youngest at the time. I remember dropping her off at daycare and not knowing when I was going to see her again. And, my kids wrote me these letters. They were on my suitcase. It was the hardest decision that I had to make, leaving everything that I loved, my kids, my family, and going to Salinas. And I just remember Sister Catherine was my home director at the time, and God knows what we need. She was so loving and supportive, and she, first few months, she was there for the first few months, and she was able to give me that love, that support that I needed to allow God to break all those walls that I had built up over the years, all the strongholds of hurt and bitterness and disappointment. I for a long time, I would say that I never wanted to be like my mom. For a long time, I would say that I blamed her. For a long time that, I would say that it was her fault, and I held on to this resentment for her not being around, for my dad not being around. He's been in prison most of my life. He only calls or reaches out when he is in prison, and for having those absent parents, I my choices on them for a long time. So in the home is when I allowed God to start dealing with those issues. I was learning who he was to me. For a long time, I knew who he was to my mom. And for a long time, I would see who he was to her, but I didn't know him personally. And that's where he started to do the work in Victory Outreach Salinas. During the time I was there, I had a 3-month plan. So at the end of the 3 months, the people who were watching my kids were like, so when are you coming to get your kids? And when God starts doing something in you, you have to let him finish. So I decided to stay in the women's home, and fortunately Pastor Herb was able to grant me favor. I was able to get one of my kids there in the home with me. And at that time, my kid's dad filed for custody, and I didn't fight him because I felt like I had nothing to stand on. I had nothing to offer them. I had no home. I had given up everything to come to the women's home, and I settled for visits on Sunday, and all they could say was that I was a dirty drug addict and I was never going to change, and that I just my kids. But that's what the world said about me, and I wanted to show them that there was something different, that God is able to do something to change a person's life. And so I stayed in the women's home, and I got distracted. I took my eyes off of God, and I don't regret that decision because I have my amazing son Damien. But I allowed a man to come in and take my eyes off of God, and I thought he was the one. I thought he was the man that was sent from God. And I left the home at 10 months. I went to go stay with my grandma Marina, and we started dating. We tried to ask Pastor Herb's permission. He told us to wait. We didn't wait. We dated for 3 months. We got married secretly. That should have been a red flag there, that we got married without any of our family present, or without anybody doing it for us. But I was like, I don't want to live in sin, and I was trying to justify those actions, and I was blinded by the deception of the perfect picture of having that family. And he was still in second phase, so we didn't even live together the first few months we were married. Then he moved in with us, and I thought he was done with his drug addict lifestyle, and he wasn't, because I was. And it didn't start right away. It started with cigarettes, and he began to stop going to church, and then we all stopped going to church, and then I was the only one working, and just so many things that I should have saw the signs, and I didn't. I was blinded by my love for him, and he had become an idol in my heart. I had put him on this pedestal, and even though he wasn't the best husband or the best father, I had given my relationship my everything. And I was working and taking care of him like he was my child. Whatever he asked, I would do it. And we had a son. We had a miscarriage. We had a son. And once I had my son, it was postpartum depression, on top of just tired of our relationship and not knowing how to fix it. Tired of the way he treated me, tired of the way I felt. I just wanted to die. And I tried to go back to work after I had my son. I was taking all kinds of depression medications. And it was like I was taking something to sleep. I was taking something to wake up. I was taking something so I didn't feel sad. I was taking something, all these medications that the doctors want to give you and diagnose you with all these things, and and nothing seemed to work. I was once again searching for an answer in people and things, and I was never finding it, never attaining it. I could never be normal. And there was a fire in our apartment, and he started doing drugs in our house, and just to be around him, I would get up and drink with him, and mix my depression medications with alcohol, and that's how it started for me. And he would let people in our house at all hours of the night, and just so that I can keep an eye. That's how I justified it in my mind, is me keeping an eye on And that's how it started, just trying to be around him because I loved him so much. And there was a fire in our apartment that he had caused, and we had to be out. We had to leave everything so that it was in the kitchen, and I was trapped in the bedroom with my son. And my kids were outside, and I'm screaming out the window, and I'm just like, I hope I die in this fire. I wanted to die, and I just wanted my life to be over. And yet, no, it wasn't over at that point. So we went in to stay in hotel rooms. Thankfully, that's not the end of my story. We made it out of the fire. They came and rescued us. We stayed in hotel rooms, and come to find out that they found us at fault. So they put us out of the apartment. They gave us 30 days to get our stuff out. We had nowhere to take our stuff. So I just remember us having to be out of the motels because they were no longer paying for it, and all of our stuff outside of the apartment. We would go back and they put it in our carport, but we got what we can carry with us, and we had to be out. And just like that, I was homeless. I was already at a place where I was getting visits with my kids. I was picking them up for holidays and weekends, and just like that, it was all ruined. And that's when I broke even more. I was getting high with him. We were out on the streets. I had my son. I was able to send Alicia away to stay with my mom at 4 times, and I had my son. He was a baby, and I remember just carrying a suitcase and trying to take diapers and staying under bushes. And in Marina, they don't allow the homeless to be out on the streets after a certain hour. So you had to go and find hiding, find shelter somewhere. They would ship you to Salinas or another city, but you couldn't be on the streets. You couldn't be pushing carts. You couldn't carry suitcases. So I remember there was a couple nights we slept on the beach, and it was just so cold. We went there maybe before 9, and just trying to keep my son warm, and and we had to stay up all night and trying to get our dope before we went to the beach. And I just thinking, this is not the life. And we had friends. I had friends that would let me stay, and just trying to find places to stay. And I just remember being so embarrassed that I didn't want to call my family. I didn't want to tell anybody what was going on. And I told them that I was staying with people because I've never been homeless in my life. But the choices and my actions have led me to a life of homelessness. And here I was getting high again, knowing that I was delivered, and I wanted to go back to that because that's what keeps me from my kids. But yet there I was getting high. And I remember we took a bus to King City to go and just to get out of Marina for a while and be homeless in King City. And we took the bus to Salinas, just trying to keep moving and stay with friends and family, his friends, some of his family. And he was writing bag checks. He was trying to find ways to get money for us. He was stealing. He had me stealing. He had this scam. He had these tactics. And I remember just always arguing with him, like, you're supposed to be the provider. You're supposed to be taking care of us. And yet he wasn't. And I remember telling him that I was tired of this life. We were in Prunedale, staying with a friend. Their PG&E was off. I had went to go try to get food stamps, and I had went with a guy friend of mine, and he was upset about that. So when I came back, he we were sitting on the couch, and he grabbed me by my hair. He dragged me to the room, and he was like hitting me and telling me that I'm cheating on him and all this crazy stuff. And and I just remember the next day I was like, I'm out, I'm done. I went and I left, and I went and got high with that same friend. I came back, and my daughter had called her dad and said she was afraid. And I just remember flipping out because they came to get them, and it was like I was losing my kids all over again. Even though we were trying to have a place for them to have a family, still visit with them while I was homeless, it wasn't enough, and it wasn't right. And that's when I just kind of fell off the handle, because he took them away, and I just broke. At that point, I was just whatever I needed to do to stay high, to keep my son with me, and I was just done. I was so done, and and yet I still stayed with him after that. And my mom during this time was still there, my rock, and she kept telling me, there's a place you can go to the women's home. And I just remember being so embarrassed, and we made our way to Gilroy. And I just remember we went to the Compassion Center when it was on Monterey Street, and they gave us, some clothes and food, and they said we could use that as a mail address. And he was like, I don't know what to do. And I remember we went to Los Animas Park, and he left me there, and he went to the men's home, and it was just the breaking point, because now I was really alone. Like, I have no street smarts. I don't know how to handle anything out in the streets. And I had tried to overdose on pills, and for whatever reason I just couldn't do it right. I didn't want to make a mess, so I didn't try to slip my wrists or anything, but I was just wanting to die. I was so done with my life that I was so depressed and so fed up with life that I was just done. And I remember my mom said to come and stay. I stayed for the weekend, and on July 15th, I went to the women's home here in Gilroy for restoration. July 15th, 2015, and that was probably the best decision I ever made, the second best decision I ever made, because that's when I was like, okay, God, I can't do this without you. I can't make it without you. And that's when I just started weaning myself off of all the pills I was taking, and doing everything that I could to learn who he was to me. And since then, I have had to deal with a divorce. I've had to deal with trying to get my kids back. I've had to deal with the brokenness again of losing everything I love. I thought I loved my husband. I thought he was the man for me, but God had a different plan for me. And that was a really tough time in my life too, because we were trying to get back on our feet. I was trying to get everything together, and yet it just wasn't working. He was actually like a cancer in my life. And it wasn't until that I finally let him go that God began to start doing a work in my life. It wasn't until that I was just done with everything. I surrendered my kids. I surrendered my marriage. I surrendered everything in my past. It wasn't until then that God began to change me, that he began to touch me. He began to fill the brokenness. And there's nothing like the love of God, and it was through the brokenness. There was times where I still was on the worship team, and I didn't want to sing, and I couldn't smile because I was dealing with, carrying the dead weight of a person who didn't want to be on the same path as me, on a person who didn't care about God as much as I did, and having so much love for him. And then it was then that I realized that, God is a jealous God, and, I had made this man a God to me, and I had given him all this love and attention and affection, and I was putting God on the back burner. I was putting my kids on the back burner. And so God had given me peace. I'm not saying to go and get divorced if your man's not saved. I'm not saying that. That was my story and my journey. But God had given me peace to separate from my ex-husband. And that was a hard decision to make. Don't get me wrong. I don't question it. I know that's what I needed to do, but I still, have love for him. I just don't love him as I used to. And it took a lot of brokenness, and it took a lot of self-examination. It took me being surrendered to God to allow him to move in my life. I've been able to have my daughter Marissa home with us. She's been with us for a year now, and able to send her to the UTC. I've been able to be that godly example to my children. We live and breathe church, and we pray and we read together, and they've watched me blossom and like a phoenix rise from the ashes of depression and anxiety and addiction, and there's no turning back for me now. It's not an option for me to not serve God. It's not an option for me to allow depression and insecurities to set in, because sometimes we can get caught up in the unworthiness of our past, that we're not worthy of salvation, we're not worthy of healing, but God sees something so much greater in us that we can even imagine. And beginning in these last few years, God has allowed me to grow so much in him, because I've just completely surrendered. I've given him my everything, my heartache, my brokenness. And there's scripture I hang on to, that God does not despise a broken and contrite heart. And for a long time I was broken, even though I walk around with a smile. There have been some trials, and I've been broken, and but God has been my joy. He has been my strength, and that has allowed me to carry on. And I can say today, he's provided a home for us. He's provided a new car for me. He has carried me through so many situations, so many times where I could have given up and said, I'm done. He's allowed me to talk about my past, and he's allowed me to influence other women and other girls. And, now I'm like a foster mom to a few of the UTC girls, and being an influence in their life. And no, I'm not perfect, and no, I don't make the right decisions. And yes, I fail, and yes, I get tempted sometimes, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up. That doesn't mean I'm going to lay down and die. I'm going to continue to persevere, because I have little eyes watching me, and I know that the God within me is greater than he that's in this world. And if you can be encouraged by my story tonight, if I can leave you with anything, that it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter who you were, it doesn't matter the pain that you're struggling with, it doesn't matter the anger that you might hold inside. It's when you surrender to God, when you begin to know who he is and know who he's called you to be, just start communicating with him. Our prayers is our communication to him, and reading is his communication to us. Establishing that foundation on prayer and reading your word and staying connected. Even through this time, it's been really hard. It's been a struggle not having my church fam, my worship fam, but staying connected in any way that we can, and reaching out to each other, and using that fellowship of the saints, of people who you can surround yourself with, that will encourage you when you're weak, that will lift you up when you're strong. I thank God for the people in my life that I have that will tell me the truth, when I'm wrong, that are going to call me on it, that are not going to allow me to just give up, roll over and die. They're going to tell me, and it's up to me to listen, but I have those people who tell me the truth in love, and I have those people who encourage me to keep going. I thank God for Pastor James and Sister Mercy, because a lot of times I would call Sister Mercy and I'd be like, Sister Mercy, I can't do this, I'm gonna kill this man, and all through my divorce she was there, and my parents were there for me and praying for me, and Pastor James, he saw something in me and he pushed me to sing. He pushed me to use my voice to minister the gospel. And, I can definitely say that I have grown so much in worship in this past year that I don't hold back, and I have found my own worship voice. And that's how I fight my battles. That's how I stay connected to God, because I can tap into his presence. I can tap into the peace of God, and that's how you have to find your way to fight your battles. It doesn't say that this journey will be easy, but it says we won't do it alone. And if I can encourage you tonight, or whenever you watch this testimony, that God has a plan and a purpose for you. And no matter how far you stray in the wilderness, his plan will come to pass. You just got to give him a chance. You just have to surrender and allow him to work in you and be obedient to his voice. There's power in your yes. And I say yes all the time. But I just pray that you are blessed. I pray that you just continue to choose Christ and continue to follow him. And when you fall, get back up, because you can do it.